Hello, everybody. I'm Aditi from the International Solid Waste Association, ISWA, and I'm moderating today's webinar on unwrapping plastic waste issues in Asia. Thank you very much for joining us today. Before starting our discussions, I'd like to briefly introduce you to ISWA. The International Solid Waste Association is a global, independent, and non-profit association. It is the only worldwide association promoting sustainable, comprehensive, and professional waste management, while also promoting the transition to a circular economy. We're open to individuals, organizations from the scientific community, public institutions, and public and private companies from all around the world working in the field or interested in waste management. Our mission is to promote and develop sustainable and professional waste management worldwide, and we currently have members from over 110 countries. As I just mentioned, ISWA is a membership-based organization, so we count on the support of our members to carry out our work. So if you're not yet a member, please take a moment to visit our membership page by visiting the link on the screen. You could also reach out to our membership manager, Mr. Daniel Purchase. His email is on the screen by writing to dpurchase@iswa.org. We have several membership options with discounts for students, low-income countries, and online members. So take a moment to visit our webpage. Early this year, our planet was hit by a seemingly invisible force that brought most economies to a grinding halt. Surgical masks, single-use plastics, PPE have been vital in supporting society during the COVID-19 pandemic. A surge in the market for plastics has emerged. Gloves, masks, food packaging material, PPE are in high demand. The COVID-19 crisis has spurred a rapid expansion in the production of plastic products that are easily available and easily discarded. The production of these materials was absolutely necessary. So there is no denying that single-use plastic has been a lifesaver in the battle against COVID-19, especially for frontline healthcare workers. But their growing volumes has created another major issue, that of their safe disposal. So we need to ask the question, where do they end up after being discarded? There are several stories of gloves and other PPE washing up on the world's beaches, and you must be reading that all over the news right now. Of course, the proliferation of plastic waste is not new, and subsequently that of marine pollution. You can see a photograph right on the screen right now. This was already a major concern before the pandemic. But due to the increase in production and use of this material during this time, it threatens to reverse the progress that we've already made globally with regards to single-use plastics. And so if you're not careful, we might actually end up creating a large environmental and public health calamity in the future. But it's not all doom and gloom. With proper and sound waste management, we can actually help avert this scenario. So now I'm actually going to turn to our eminent panelists to hear their thoughts on how we can properly deal with this looming crisis. We are going to begin with a keynote presentation, followed by a moderated discussion, and that's going to be followed by a question and answer session with you all. And so I encourage you to type your questions in the tab that's marked questions on your screen below or onto your right. You may type in your questions at any time during the webinar, but we will get to them only at the end for the speakers to answer. We have a really great panel of speakers with us today. So let me just begin by introducing all of them. If you could please all turn on your cameras and just wave, because I'll just take a moment to introduce you. So let me begin by actually introducing Mr. Leong. He's the co-founder and chairman of the Waste Management Association of Malaysia, and he's also an ISWA board member. He's been actively involved in promoting proper waste management through WMAM. He's held various positions previously. He's been a resident engineer to a general manager in charge of various water supply projects. And under his leadership, WMAM hosted a very successful ISWA World Congress in 2018. In 2019, he has been appointed the CEO of WMAM Environment. So thank you, Mr. Ho, for being here. Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Melissa Tan. Ms. Melissa Tan is the chairwoman of the Waste Management and Recycling Association of Singapore. It's also known as WMRAS. She has been in this position for 3 consecutive terms, championing the association's efforts to enhance professionalism and technological capabilities of waste management industry in Singapore. She's a passionate environmentalist. Ms. Tan's life has actually revolved around waste and recycling industry for the past 20 years. She also holds the position of in the board of trustees of the WMRAS Academy, which is a learning and development arm of the association. She has been conferred with the Public Service Medal in 2017 for her contribution to public service. This is a Singaporean national honor, actually. It's a title that's given especially in Singapore. So thank you very much, Ms. Tan, for being with us today. Next, I want to move on to introducing Dr. Ashish Chaturvedi. Dr. Ashish Chaturvedi is the Director of Climate Change in GIZ India. He specializes in climate change mitigation and adaptation, waste management, sustainable consumption and production, and environmental policy. In his previous role as senior advisor with the GIZ, he advised the Indian ministries and departments at various levels of the government and implemented projects in the area of waste and resource management, climate change, and economic instruments. Dr. Chaturvedi has published extensively in books, journals, and magazines. Thank you, Mr. Chaturvedi, for being with us today. Moving on to Ms. Dini Trisyanti. Ms. Dini Trisyanti is the director and co-founder of Sustainable Waste Indonesia. SWI is a research and consultancy company and an organizational member of the Indonesian Solid Waste Association, which in turn is ISWA's national member in Indonesia. For the past 4 to 5 years, through SWI, Ms. Trisyanti has been focusing on plastic waste issues in Indonesia. She's looking at the value chains, she's looking at the recycling ecosystem, she's looking at the business models from a circular economy perspective. Thank you so much, Ms. Trisyanti, for joining us today. So without further ado, I'd actually now give the floor to our keynote speaker, Mr. Hode Leong. So I'll go on mute till he finishes his presentation.
Thank you, Aditi, for the kind introduction. And it's good to have all of you on this webinar on unwrapping plastic waste issues in Asia. Okay, so what's happening? And suddenly the unexpected reality of a virus-stricken pandemic dawned on the entire world in early 2020, bringing practically everything to a standstill, except the hospitals and the essential services. The coronavirus or COVID-19 outbreak had apparently started from the city of Wuhan in the People's Republic of China. President Trump even called it the Chinese virus, which is just very Trump-like. Whether you call it the Chinese virus or coronavirus, the important lesson learned from this pandemic is, what are you doing about it? How are you going to stop it from spreading? And how do you contain the situation? What is the remedy or the cure? Or how fast can we overcome it? Not by asking who started it or blaming the guy who started the fire. I have to control the slides at the same time, so please bear with me. Now, in just 3 months, China has managed to flatten the curve from receiving over 1,000 cases daily to almost 0 or less than 100 cases daily. The total cases now stands at 89,339 cases, and with only 4,696 deaths as of August the 12th. As soon as another outbreak reopens after it relaxes its restriction, it is contained within a matter of weeks. And today, China is sharing this experience in overcoming the outbreak and sending PPE and other medical aids to the rest of the world. On the contrary, the US have failed to act responsibly, and the number of cases have since surged from 66 cases in March to 5.2 million in a matter of 6 months, with more than 160,000 deaths as of August the 12th. And today, with the coronavirus pandemic still looming, transportation of non-essential and critical items have grounded almost to a halt. A new category of waste has emerged, and the rising demand for personal protective equipment or PPE, such as surgical masks and other disposable masks, face shields, gloves, disposable protective clothing used by the frontliners at hospitals and quarantine centers, has seen an exponential surge in demand, resulting in a substantial increase in a new category of pandemic-related waste. Yeah, okay. Now, the coronavirus has spurred a rapid expansion in the production of various plastic products that were made easily accessible and discarded. These plastics were not only used in our day-to-day run to the supermarkets, but were a necessity in hospitals and other essential services. The production of other plastic materials was also in high demand, such as food packaging, plastic bags, face masks, that were used for households and smaller businesses. And there is no denying that these single-use plastics may not have been a lifesaver during the fight against their invisible force, especially for the frontline health workers. This may have also helped with the curbing of the transmission of the virus, as reusable cups and packaging is believed to increase the spread of the virus, as some countries believe that the virus could stick to them. This, however, spurred another issue whereby piles of used plastics materials are piled in front of hospitals and used masks by the public are being discarded irresponsibly that has impacted the environment tremendously. It was also reported that in China, more than 20 cities have overloaded their medical waste, with Wuhan being the center of the outbreak, producing up to 6 times more. These medical waste also include single-use plastics. Other countries such as Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia have also seen a surge in plastic waste as environmental awareness takes a backseat to health concerns. With consumers stuck at home, the people became reliant on food delivery services and online shopping platforms to obtain goods, with a corresponding increase in disposable packaging. While environmental concerns have been put on the backseat amidst the outbreak, activists and environmental watchdogs say this could lead to a larger problem in the future. In the past, plastics are emblematic materials that have transformed our everyday lives for over 60 years, delivering unprecedented functionality. The proliferation of single-use plastics around the world is accelerating climate change and should be urgently halted. With the production expanding worldwide, fueled in part by the fracking boom in the US, report says plastic contributes a greenhouse gas emission at every stage of its life cycle, from its production to its refining and the way it is managed as a waste product. The plastic binge threatens attempts to meet the Paris Climate Agreement, and this means that plastic will be responsible for up to 13% of the total carbon budget by 2050, which is equivalent to 615 coal-fired plants. Single-use plastics makes up 40% of the demand for plastics, fueling a boom in production from 2 million tons in 1950s to 380 million tons in 2015. And by the end of 2015, 8.3 billion metric tons of plastics have been produced, which 2/3 have been released to the environment and remains there. Out of sight, out of mind. So what happens to the world's plastic waste? Since the enforcement of the One Sword policy, which bans the import of unprocessed plastics in January 2018, the developed countries were caught unprepared when the usual flow of plastic waste was prevented from entering China. Millions of tons of plastic waste had to look for new destinations to get rid of plastic waste coming from North America, Europe, and Australia. Most of the ASEAN countries, except Singapore, have been a major recipient of this plastic waste. Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia have started sending the containers of plastic waste back to its country of origin. And these developed countries have started reviewing their waste treatment and disposal policies to keep the plastic waste within their country and introduce facilities to treat their own waste, creating a circular economy. The inclusion of plastic waste as part of the Basel Convention on Hazardous Materials are also being deliberated. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation estimates the costs arising from single-use plastics, together with those of the greenhouse gases emitted during the production, to be $40 billion. This staggering figure exceeds the current plastic industry's profit pool, which further strengthens the argument for why current plastic production and consumption must be curbed. So where do we go from here? As the global movement to protect the planet against spiraling plastic production continues to gain momentum, and the industries responsible for its production face new heights of scrutiny, a new plastics opportunity has emerged for both business to both create value and drive more sustainable practice simultaneously. If regulatory and voluntary measures prioritizing recycling and recovery can also align with sustainable innovation and new technological advancement, the global need for virgin plastics could be dramatically reduced. As some suggest, the global standardization of plastic packaging types may be one solution to this issue. This could be realized through a fusion of public sector collaboration to create effective policies, coupled with self-regulated industry standards, resulting in improved recycling rates and easier resource recovery. The new plastic economy global commitment was announced by the UN Environment and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in October 2018 and has more than 290 signatories. The commitment shows that many major public and private sectors are now advocating a circular economy model that closes the loop on plastic production and encourages innovative reuse. It is the view of these organizations that with the correct regulatory and policy boundary conditions, incentives and price signals, improved environmental consequences, and increased economic growth can be concurrently achieved. By closing the loop, plastics would no longer be classified as waste. They would instead act as a key source of value, entering and re-entering the value chain as technical and biological inputs. This closed-loop solution has gradually begun to gain momentum as businesses realize the potential size of the prize on the table now, that the technology exists to enable the use of plastic as a raw material in future plastic production. Today's webinar on unwrapping plastic waste issues in Asia will not only shed some light on the issues and challenges that we are facing now, but allow innovative ideas and solutions to be born, giving rise to new opportunities in the plastic and other secondary resource industry in the future. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you will have a fruitful webinar session ahead. Back to Aditi.
Thank you very much for your fantastic inputs, Mr. Ho. So now I'd like to actually move into the moderated question and answer session with the speakers. If you could all just come online, we can make the panel screen a little smaller. If you can just all turn on your cams. Great, we have everyone here. So just to set the stage for all the speakers and also for the participants, I'd like to ask a general question to all of you. So we'll start with, let's start with Mr. Ho again. It's a question about how the municipal solid waste sector in your country has been affected. You've given a little bit of a global perspective. You've talked about a little bit about what is happening in Malaysia. But can you specifically also just tell us what kind of trends are you observing, and specifically on plastic waste, when you have the whole sector, you're actually servicing quite a bit of Malaysia. So if you can just give a little bit of an input there. And this is going to be the same question that I'm going to ask all the panelists to set the stage.
Thanks, Aditi. Well, in Malaysia, practically all the commercial and the industrial activities came to a halt. And only the supermarkets and eateries were doing online food deliveries. They were open, and waste from commercial industrial sectors were almost zero, whereas food packaging and packaging materials from online shopping was on the increase. And another abnormal phenomenon was the increase of bulky waste, wood from discarded furnitures, papers, metals, and electrical waste, as many of the people who were locked down were doing spring cleaning at home. So garden waste from the household were also on the increase during the lockdown. Plastic waste from packaging and PPEs have also increased considerably. So this is a scenario that we observed during the lockdown period.
Thank you very much. I would then move on to Ms. Tan to actually answer the same question. So how has municipal solid waste sector in Singapore been affected? And what kind of trends have you been observing? And also speak about plastic waste a little bit.
Okay, basically Singapore and Malaysia were neighbors, right? So I echo what Mr. Ho has just said. Most of the people are actually at home during the circuit breaker in Singapore. So naturally, we see that the amount of waste, the household waste, were actually generated, which is a lot more by about 11%, which is equivalent to about 73,000 tons, compared to our pre-lockdown at 66,000 tons. So this is generally this is what we observe. Likewise, the same thing as what Mr. Ho has mentioned. Basically, most of the people are staying at home, so we will have more packaging waste, we have more food waste, And because they are at home, nothing to do, right? So they will do, you know, spring cleaning, housekeeping. They start to declutter things that they doesn't want. So as a municipal waste collector, we actually have more waste to collect. But having said that, we also notice that the collection services have actually dropped nearly by a fifth, because we actually have a reliance of foreign workers. So basically, because of the social distancing, staff being absent, they could be still on a home leave in their respective countries, and they are not even back to Singapore, especially during the Malaysia MCO, the Malaysia lockdown. So we have quite a big numbers of Malaysians that couldn't come over to Singapore. So we actually have a staff absence. And for us, for the waste companies in Singapore, we are also very, very concerned about the workers' health and safety, which will also affect the sorting, the processing, you know, as well as the trading for the plastic materials or paper, or, you know, even other scrap metals, etc. And then whereas for the plastic waste, Singapore actually has very little processing plant at the moment. So usually what our current waste collectors would do is they will collect the waste plastics from the commercial or the industrial buildings or entities, which the plastics are naturally, they are cleaner, and it makes it a lot easier for us to pack, sort, bale for export to buyers around the region. But of course, during the pandemic, things get slower. And because of the trans-border restrictions during the period, we basically can't send the plastic out of the country. So we actually have to send the plastics to the incineration plant. So this is actually the interim solution. But it's not going to last us very long, because for us, we had to bear in mind that we have an estimate lifespan of our man-made island, Semakau Island, right, which will run out of space in 2045. So we really have to do something about it. I think the good news is through this pandemic, it actually makes our industry companies, our players, industry players, work together very, very closely with our government agencies to really look at and expedite in implementing alternative solutions to increase recycling locally and to create byproducts out of our recyclable or recycled materials or plastics. So this is the phase where we are at the moment. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I heard some things that are, of course, alarming because of the pandemic you talked about, and both Malaysia and Singapore, you said very similar, your neighbors. So you said the packaging and food waste has gone up, more municipal solid waste is being generated. You talked about 11% increase. Collection services have gone down because you rely on workers from outside. And but what you did say is that because of this, you're working together with government agencies, coming up with solutions that might be innovative, which might stick for the future. So this is good news. Some good news, some bad news, of course, all go hand in hand. Now I'd like to just pivot over to this side of the Asian subcontinent, talking to Mr. Chaturvedi, Dr. Chaturvedi. The same question: what have you seen here in India? What kind of trends are you seeing specifically on plastic waste?
Thanks, Aditi, very much. And I think the broad trends are quite similar. So, of course, the quantity of packaged materials has definitely gone up because of a lot of online shopping. So there is the e-commerce booms actually really happening as far as buying grocery and even sort of necessities, but also other kinds of requirements like clothing and so on. So I think the e-commerce industry is actually kind of remarkably sort of short, and there are numbers which are in the range of 70%, 60% sort of shift in the sort of favor of sort of online shopping for groceries and for other kinds of sort of necessities. Of course, the personal protective equipment has sort of increased dramatically as well. And this is another set of actors who haven't traditionally been part of the conversations on sort of waste management, especially because the sort of the extent of the material was just not as much as we have right now. These days, every household is sort of, depending on the numbers of people, every individual has 2 or 3 masks, if not more, which if they are reusable, otherwise they're actually buying and throwing sort of single-use masks as well, these surgical masks that you can get. The other part, which is again sort of interesting, the parallel between what Melissa was just talking about, the workers from Malaysia coming into Singapore and sort of well, we have similar situation within India. You know, the internal sort of migrants who were involved in waste management. So migrant populations are actually quite heavily involved in waste management solutions because that's one easy sort of income generating activity in large cities. And I think the World Bank's initial numbers several years ago were around 1 to 2% of the urban population being involved in waste management activities, which is a massive number, right? And just imagine the kind of floating population that we've seen due to the pandemic. So of course, the implication has been that there has sort of some kind of municipal services have actually been kind of curtailed. Also, the informal sector, which is very vibrant in India, as far as all kinds of municipal solid waste, plastic waste management as well, they've actually kind of suffered a lot because of the restrictions in movement, because of social distancing, also because of the sort of migration, internal migration back to the rural areas. So that has, of course, had an implication on the sort of the operation of the municipal services as well as the market, right? So the trading which was happening in the sort of plastic waste management has actually declined, and it's also led to the reduction in the prices of the secondary raw materials, which basically means that well, you're actually making virgin plastics much more attractive, no? If the secondary plastics are actually going down in value as well. And then finally, the point is about sort of how are we what is the impact on policy? And I think there I see something which is kind of encouraging, which is where the Central Pollution Control Board as well as some of the state pollution control boards have actually really cracked down on the biomedical waste which is coming out due to the pandemic. They've had several rounds of meetings, the Central Pollution Control Board. There have been the Indian regulation, the Indian guideline on extended producer responsibility for plastics were launched, and the deadline for comments was the end of last month, so end of July, 31st of July. And so there is and lots of comments were received by the Ministry of Environment. So I think that's another area where there is, I think, a realization that maybe the coverage of that guideline might have to be expanded, keeping into account the pandemic as well. But I think a large part of the trends remain similar. The quantity is increasing, services have been curtailed, the economics is suffering, and also the fact that there is a certain realization that the broader movement against plastics might not necessarily be sort of stuck because of the pandemic. Of course, you've realized that there is a roadblock. There is maybe a sort of a hump that we are hitting. But I think both the private sector as well as the government, also the civil society, seems quite keen on continuing the momentum on plastics, but we need to find sort of innovative solutions. And I think the pandemic's actually allowing us to think about long-term solutions as well. Of course, the priorities are different at the current juncture, but it's also giving us the time to sort of pause and think about long-term solutions.
Thank you very much. That was a very nice, actually, summary of what's been going on here. And obviously some parallels. You brought in nicely the issue of what's happening with the migrant population moving back from urban centers. And that's, of course, affecting, since you said 1 to 2% of the urban population that's actively involved in waste management services. But I think from all of your points of views, you've all had like a sort of a silver lining. It's giving us pause. It's making us think about long-term solutions, maybe making people work together that might not have done before. People are realizing how important our sector is. Thank you very much, all three of you. I'm now pivoting back to Indonesia. So Ms. Tusyanti, if you can actually answer the same question from the perspective of Indonesia. What's happening there? What are you observing in terms of also plastic waste?
Yeah.
You asked me for the photograph that I had, Munchar. So what do you see?
Yeah. Thank you, Aditi. I think from Indonesia's point of view, some of the points that have been addressed by the previous speakers are just quite the same for us. I mean, the number of the volume of waste is increasing from the households, but in the other hand, from commercial areas, they are very, very decreasing. And the composition of waste is also quite shifting, yeah. I mean, like the online shopping packagings are becoming more and more. And one of our friend in the waste facilities, they become quite, challenging to sorting, like really glue tape into the cardboard thing. So whether it's plastic or paper, it's quite challenging because more and more is like glued together. I mean, this kind of shifting of condition is happening also in Indonesia. And from the point of view of PPE, I think it's also quite similar with India, that we are more aware of this, category of waste that we call specific waste, because it's not really supposed to be mixed with household waste. And in our regulation, it's separated regulation. So the government also speed up this regulation for specific waste that should be in place. And this is one of the strategy to speed up the need of, really having a different streams of treatment for this and the household plastic waste. So I think the difference between the other speakers is, if I may show the baseline of what we have in Indonesia, I put up some information in the slide about the data in Indonesia. So I think I need to point out here that we have a big problems of collection of plastics still in Indonesia, because we are, thousands of islands, and we have 400 municipalities. And at the moment, it's very, even before pandemic, municipal solid waste is still struggling to meet the targets set by the government. I mean, if we can see here in the slides, the fact in our country shows that for plastics, it's still less than 10% recycled. And if we calculate the numbers of marine litter, so there's 0.27 to 0.5 million tons a year, actually, marine plastic is still uncollected in Indonesia. And we still have so many plastics end up in landfill instead of in recycling, or even we don't have a waste to energy yet. And the fact that most of the plastic recycling in Indonesia is contributed by the informal sector. This is also one of the issues. And when the pandemic happens, see that the collection system is actually run by the price of recyclables. And when the price of recyclables decrease, like India also have the same situation, I think then it's like a snowball effect. It caused the factories, some of them, are lowering the capacity, and then the waste collection, the waste pickers, they cannot sell their recyclables and so on. And from our point of view of waste sector, a lot of waste facilities in Indonesia, which is run by small organizations like Community Waste Bank or TPS3R, they are reliant on this recyclables sales. So when the price of virgin materials is really cheap and the demand is decreasing, then it causes a problem. A lot of waste facilities are not able to run because of this shortage of funding resources. So I think this what I'd like to address, beside also the impact of the pandemic in terms of waste composition shifting and so on. We do have also like bigger challenge in Indonesia, how to deal with the collection and handling of this rising amount of waste. So I think that is the bigger picture. And in the public perception also, I think there's a dilemma in public, because in one side they want to prevent the spread of the virus with plastics. Also, it's very useful for that. But in the other side, there's like a more and more banning of single-use plastic, and it's become dilemmatic for the people, especially for food delivery, because you want the package to be sterile, right? It's really difficult for the public to adjust this thing. I think that's more or less the one that I'd like to address here.
Thank you very, very much. Did you want to show any other slides, or maybe that's later?
Yeah, I think maybe for the next slide, the second one. This is the previous one is the environmentalist concern, the data that we have at the moment from the environment side. But I think the dilemma between environment and economy is always happening. And then we in Indonesia also try to grow our productivity and try to bigger the recycling capacity and so on. And this is the data that I put together in one slide. It's actually a lot of information from the Ministry of Industry. But what I'd like to emphasize here is that recycling industry and plastic downstream industry in Indonesia really plays a big role, and it's becoming a very dynamic and interesting pro and cons, with the plastics banning and circular economy. It's a lot of things going on. So I think that's it, IDT.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Jasyanti. I'm going to pivot back to Mr. Hode Leong. So you already spoke about the increase in plastic use you're seeing during the pandemic. I think all the 4 countries I've mentioned, packaging waste is going up, household waste is going up since industries are sort of shut down. So in Malaysia, how are you dealing as a company? How are you dealing with the increase in volumes? And is the sector, as you see it now, equipped to deal with such a drastic increase?
Well, the waste collection and the cleansing services in Malaysia is gazetted as part of the essential services by the Ministry of Health. So we do not really have an issue in terms of continuing with the services of collection. We are operating as usual. In fact, we're doing more. We are helping out in terms of disinfecting the areas that are affected by the quarantine centers. And also the medical and hazardous waste management facilities are also working. And therefore, we do not really have a crisis in terms of dealing with the additional waste or even single-use plastics in Malaysia. However, most of the recycling facilities are shut during this period. So although there's an increase in all these plastic waste that are being produced, they basically end up in landfills since we do not have waste-to-energy facilities here, which are basically still at a planning stage. So that's the scenario here. We don't have a crisis, but I think if we have the proper facilities, we could manage this much better. Recycling basically shut ever since the China sort policy came about. We had this crisis of plastic scraps coming here, and companies were struggling to get the license to process the plastics. But unfortunately, the pandemic came. Many of them were just shutting down, basically. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So what you basically said is that waste collection services are doing perfectly fine, and you can deal with the increase because it's a gazetted service, public service. What has been affected is the recycling sector, because it's been shut, and of course the SWOT policy also has played a big role. I remember having that conference last year where WMAM had organized, and it was all about what's happening with the plastics.
Right.
Hopefully, we'll have to see whether you have to build waste to energy plants or some other kind of technologies. I know.
The government has announced some ambitious program of having 1 waste to energy plant per state. We have 13 states. Wow. It's ambitious, but again, it takes a lot longer than it does.
Of course, it's a lot of money, and the energy goes into that. But maybe other technologies. I mean, people are researching, looking at physical recycling or chemical recycling of plastics and so on. So maybe some other technology gets cheaper. Who knows?
Who knows? I'm a little bit pessimistic about processing plastic, because it's a supply and demand game, and looking at the trend today, I think unless there are some mechanism to support the processing of used plastics, it will be very challenging. Yeah.
So it's a complicated issue
Yeah.
with the whole economics and so on. But thank you so much. I'm now pivoting to Indonesia. So you spoke about the fact that even collection services there are struggling, and that's something that you want to look at in the longer term. And there's always this dilemma between economy and the environment. I think it's a dilemma that all countries face. So just how is Indonesia handling the surge in the volume of plastics right now? So you said it's a lot of it is going, I hope it's not being dumped openly, but it's going to landfills. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for Indonesia, there's already programs been initiated by the government and also industries, also communities. And in the government side, we have just launched the ministry decree for it's called a roadmap for producers' roles in reduction of waste. And it's more or less an EPR regulation in Indonesia. So we have that one. And technical guidelines, however, are still being drafted to follow up that decree. But during this pandemic situation, it's not really socialized to bigger audience. But that's one thing. And with this regulation, it's actually hope to accelerate the roles of producers to take back mechanism, take back their packaging waste, and really do something about it instead of just dumping to landfill. And another one is, I think government already also have like a campaign for source separation. This is one of the effort to behavior change for the public to actually contribute to improve quality, because we know in Indonesia is the recycling industry is actually quite good capacity, but when it comes to post-consumer plastics, it's actually not really much. The proportion is still low because this waste segregation is not really a culture in our country. So I think some other programs by the industries also have been initiated. The associations and the consumer goods companies, they have a lot of programs ranging from community-based waste management system and innovation of technology also have been implemented in some areas. And there's also like material innovation for packaging, and a lot of initiatives also for reuse station, refill station for reusing bottles and so on. And I think a lot of stakeholders in Indonesia have already put efforts in, handling this surge of waste of plastic. I think, but the thing is, in my perspective, the fundamental change is not yet seen. The fundamental change, what I meant is, the waste management, municipal waste management system in the cities itself, because in Indonesia, we have the autonomy of waste management system. So every cities have their autonomy to deal with that. And a lot of cities, they don't have enough capacity to plan, to design, to execute, and even sometimes troubleshoot what they found in reality. I mean, this is the biggest challenge, and I think is our biggest homework for overcoming the issues. Even though we have a lot of programs by a lot of stakeholders, if we don't really address the core of the problem, like the waste management in the cities, make a big higher capacity, better capacity to build better capacity in the municipalities, it's really difficult to have a significant change. That's what I think. And we have to emphasize on service delivery of waste management instead of relying on recycling industry. As Ho already mentioned, it's really supply and demand game. So this is the biggest homework for Indonesia, to really set foot on waste service delivery of waste. And recycling industry, in the other hand, in my perspective, they actually wait for waste management sector to partner with, because they need a supply. They cannot. I mean, now they prefer post industrial waste or scrap, because that's easier. You know, you don't have to wash, you don't have to, a lot of things to do, right, when it comes to post-consumers. So I think the initiative's already there in Indonesia, and it's very positive. And the way how to integrate it and really address the core problem of service delivery in the cities, that's, I think, what's most important for us.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. I mean, the input was excellent, and I know that some really good work is being done by the Indonesian Solid Waste Association. I know some members are actually attending. Ibu Shri and her team are doing a fantastic job, you know, working together with the government, local governments, regencies, desa level. So going down all the way to the village level. And, you know, what I like about the Indonesian system, which I've now, like, over the past few months learned a lot more about because of our project, is that it's so decentralized. I mean, you give so much power to even the local communities to deal with their waste. And that's really amazing. I mean, in India, in law, we have that. I won't talk too much about it because Dr. Chaturvedi will answer that. But that's a system that we should learn from. Of course, there are challenges in every system, and you're talking about service delivery. But lots to learn.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sianti. Going to Dr. Chaturvedi now, what do you think India as a sector, or the waste management sector in India, is facing right now? And what do you think is the best option to deal with it, to deal with the plastic waste? I mean, I know a lot of it gets sort of skimmed from the system. A lot of is now ending up also on dump sites because the volumes have gone up. But in your perspective, since you've been working in this field for a while, what are your thoughts? Would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think the one sort of, if I had to really kind of point at one major issue that we're struggling with right now, I would actually call it sort of how do you manage the relationship or the interaction between extended producer responsibility initiated systems and the municipal service delivery sort of systems. So of course, I think what the previous speaker just mentioned, municipalities in India also have significant challenges, capacities, sort of constraints, technical, financial, managerial capacity constraints in delivering municipal services as far as waste management is concerned. But I think there is now a significant program of the government of India. It's called the Clean India Mission. And there has been lots of investment which has been made. So there is a certain kind of basic infrastructure which is in place for managing of waste. And now you have layers of different kinds of waste which are coming in, right? So you have the plastic waste where the producers, the extended producer responsibility regulations have also kicked in. Now, I think the fundamental problem we have is how do these two systems work together? Can they actually work together? Where do they work together? And if they really work together, then of course the other actors in the value chain, like the recyclers, like the service providers who are operating the MRFs, the material recovery facilities, would actually have the finances available and the material available to operate their facilities. So I think the fact that there is a sort of, we need to solve this problem of cooperation between these two systems. And if we manage to solve it, and it's not an easy problem to solve, it's not even solved in large sort of, well, countries which have fairly developed, as we call them, it's still a problem in a lot of these countries. How do these two systems collaborate with each other? But you need better systems of interaction, better systems of contracting. You need clarifications on sort of what are the boundaries of operation for these two different systems. Where are the overlaps? How do you actually allocate different responsibilities? Sort of, again, coming back to the contracting side from the municipalities. So I think this is hard work. And this is hard work which requires different actors to sit together in multi-stakeholder fora, multi-stakeholder platforms, and resolve these issues. I don't think this is rocket science. I think it's very, if you really systematically sit together and sort of discuss these issues, I think this problem can actually be solved relatively straightforward. Of course, there are interests and there are sort of political economy considerations as well. But I think these problems need to be solved by sitting together and solving them one at a time. And I think the pandemic has actually brought this sort of a key stakeholder in all of these discussions. The pandemic has actually brought that stakeholder very close to the waste, and that's middle class. No? Especially in India, the middle class is fairly cut off from the waste. because somebody who comes to your house, who does the dishes and does the sort of the maids who deal with the waste management, they can go and drop the waste in the bins as well. And if you have to do source segregation, people have support staff to do the source segregation as well. But now the pandemic actually got rid of a lot of the support staff, and the waste, and the middle class actually have to deal with this waste on their own. And it's brought them very close to their sort of domestic waste. And I think that's where the real rub of the sort of road will actually hit the middle class, that when you actually have to deal with these things on your own, you can relate to it better. And then you can demand these things as well. And so this entire discussion, what Vinny was talking about source segregation, this is a big problem in our country as well, in India also. So even sort of upper middle class, even sort of the most affluent of societies are not source segregating sort of at scale. Of course, there are certain sort of lighthouse cities where source segregation is happening, but source segregation is still a challenge. And I think the pandemic's actually providing us that opportunity to open this point and ram home this point, that sort of the middle class actually has to now come forward. In fact, the poor neighborhoods, the relatively sort of more not so well-to-do neighborhoods actually tend to do much better in terms of source segregation in Indian slums, for instance. So I think the middle class actually has to come up and sort of play their part. And of course, these two systems have to work together, the municipal systems and the private systems, which are initiated by the extended producer responsibility. Thank you.
It absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head. And you brought in two good discussions, two different discussions, but also related, no? Where you said now it's opened up a Pandora's box. I mean, this pandemic has sort of put pause. We're becoming self-reliant. I'm putting that in quotations because, as you said, you know, the middle class has traditionally relied very heavily on others to work, to do things in their homes. And now that you're looking at, you know, lockdowns where people have also migrated back from urban centers to rural parts of India, you're sort of getting confronted with things that you wouldn't have otherwise. So this is bringing pause. But the also other important thing that you mentioned was the EPR systems with the the private sector. And the public, so the municipal delivery systems. How do you work together? How do you put system boundaries? How do you actually get clarification at where are the overlaps and where are the things that you need to be doing and so on? Great, thank you so much, Dr. Chaturvedi. I'm going to move on. We have very limited time. Actually, it always tends to happen that the webinars sort of start running out of time because the discussions are so interesting. So quickly, I'll move on to one last questions for each of you. And then we'll open it up for the audience members' questions. And there have been some really interesting ones coming in. I've been watching the questions box. So I'm going to move to Mr. Leong. What are the long-term effects that you're seeing in Malaysia and the region because of the pandemic and all these changes that are happening? Some silver linings, some of course not so good things. But what do you think is going to be this long-term emergence of, like, what kind of systems will emerge out of this? In the next 5-10 years, in your opinion? We can't hear you.
I thought Melissa is waiting to speak. Anyway, okay.
I'm sorry, I'll go to you right after this.
Okay. Well, I have this to say. I mean, the long-term effects. If we fail to plan, we plan to fail, right? And if we fail to execute the plan, disasters are inevitable. The waste generation has exceeded the waste treatment and disposal facilities capacities in Malaysia. And after more than 3 decades, only 50% of the country are making progress to improve waste management infrastructure. And yet, many are promoting trash for cash, which is perhaps more meaningful to the lower income economies and lesser developed countries. Because Malaysia, we had the Solid Waste Act enacted in 2007 and forced in 2011. And 9 years down the road, we are still having half the country that are struggling to implement sustainable waste management. So it's the political demography in Malaysia, and that makes things a little bit more challenging here. So you have half the country that has adopted the new Solid Waste Act, and therefore they're moving forward, whereas the other half of the country are still figuring out. And when you have different states with different level of affordability, because of the inability to have sufficient revenue from the local authorities. I mean, I hear what Dini said about autonomy. It doesn't work here because we rely a lot on the cross-subsidization from federal government to state government to local authority. It's a small country compared to Indonesia, but that's and we've struggled for 15 years to get the privatization going, and we have seen good results in half the country, or the 7 states that's actually embraced or adopted the Solid Waste Act. It's a good model, but unfortunately, it will be questioned as, why are we spending so much for waste management? I'll come to talk about that towards the end of the session when I give my opinion on how it should be sustainable, because what we have today is still not sustainable, and we're talking about low tipping fees and relying on sales of recyclables to make it sustainable. I don't think so. We need something more than that. Okay.
Thank you so much. This is actually a very good point at which to ask Ms. Tan about what we can learn, from the Singaporean model in low and middle income countries, because given that the situations, I mean, and we're talking about Asian perspective now, right? Like the whole webinar is also focusing on sort of regional differences, but also regional cooperation. So the situations along all the countries are diverse and dependent on the means that are available locally, and also the national laws. Mr. Ho is just telling us about there are like Malaysia has 14 states, and half of them have adopted the Solid Waste Act and half of them are not. So there's a difference. So what are the best practices or recommendations that you can sort of come up with that we could follow in low middle income countries?
Well, I think I would actually recommend public education. I think that is very, very important, especially at this point in time during the pandemic. You can actually see that there's a surge in the single use of plastics, right? And then I also saw some of the questions that has been asked. What's going to happen to the plastics? Can we incinerate? Can we export? Can we do this or can we do that? So I would really love to see that our neighboring countries or the lower income countries, the government officials could really look into public education of their people there in terms of how do you make good use of the plastics, right? And of course, they can also look at alternative packaging, such as instead of using plastics to carry your things or contain your things, you can actually use paper bags. And if you go to somewhere like a hawker center or food center where you want to do a takeaway, because now I think people are still scared of going to the restaurants, so you can actually bring your own bag, bring your own container, so you don't have to use a single-use type of plastics where that could contain the food that you can bring back home to eat. So bring your own container or bring your own bag is the next alternative for the countries there, as well as I think what the rest of the countries could also follow suit is to look at mechanical recycling within your own country, because I think most of the neighboring countries, I think I would say China is leading it with the China ban of plastics, right? So I think the rest of the countries are now following suit that makes the transboundary of the import and the export of plastics a lot more difficult now, unless it's really the pure, clean, recyclable materials. So I think having mechanical recycling in your own country, that will also solve the plastics issues that they have. Then, of course, after you recycle your plastics into resins or into the small little pellets, and then, of course, you can then offtake, the manufacturers in your respective countries can then offtake the plastics to churn into bottles, right? Or plastic bags that could be used for many, many other ways. Like, for example, one of the Singapore company, they are actually a waste company. They are also a street cleaning or street cleansing company as well. So what they do, or what he did, was basically he collect the plastic recyclables. He actually go through the mechanical recycling to turn it into plastic bags, and he actually used the recycled plastic bags for his street cleansing businesses. So it's actually really like a close the loop effort that one of our companies is actually doing.
Nice.
Yeah, it's not a very high investment, but I think it's really closing the loop. Yeah,
that's what we need to see. I mean, these clean, closing the loop kind of circular economy solutions. Great. So you stressed on two things. You said firstly, make there should be good public education campaigns and so on during the pandemic, and then you also talked about self-reliance, where you have mechanical recycling in your own country, so you can help the industries or the manufacturing units within the own country, so that instead of actually exporting and so on. Thank you very much. I will move on to Ms. Trisyanti. The pandemic, what has it meant for waste segregation and recycling? You did touch upon it before a little bit, and all speakers have actually said something about what's happening, because the wastage is going directly, since the recycling has been shut for a little while. So what do you see in Indonesia as for waste segregation and recycling, and what do you see happen as a result of the crisis? You think this it's something good going to come out of it, or are we going backwards?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is it's becoming more challenging. I mean, as I mentioned before, waste segregation is not really a systematic system in our country. So a lot of collection of recycling is actually done by informal sector. And this is, if I may ask you, Aditi, to show the last slides that I put together. This is the slide about the recycling industries in Indonesia. So basically what we have in Indonesia, actually quite an established networking system for plastic already, for the majority of plastics like PET, PP rigid, and HDPE film, and so on. There are already a good ecosystem there. And most of this collection actually done by the informal sectors. Is it the last one, Aditi? I hope it works. Yeah, this one. So when it comes to recycling in Indonesia, we have, I mean, it's part of our research that the recycling rate in Indonesia is about 400,000 tons a year. That's what we calculated based on our research. And then recently, maybe at the moment it's different numbers, but before COVID, the number of waste pickers is actually around 2 million people in Indonesia. And this is a very big number. So we can see that a lot of livelihoods are actually depending on recycling industry in Indonesia. It's still loading here. I'm sorry.
You don't see the slide? I see it. Does everybody see the slide?
Oh, okay. In my laptop, it's still loading. But okay.
We see it. Thankfully, we see it.
So basically, this is the ecosystem. We do have already an established network and ecosystem, but when it comes to volume, it's actually still low compared to what we need to address. As I showed here, this 400,000 tons per year of plastic waste recycled is still low compared to we have 5 million tons a year, more than 5 million tons a year plastic every year. So this is a very small proportion, but this is what I want to show is like Indonesia has a very potential network already. And when the pandemic happens, we really hope that people can see this potential and really make use of it, and making a really more significant programs on circular economy, because in Indonesia, recycling ecosystem is really there, and it's a matter of how to make it grow and how to make it really links with the formal systems and the semi-formal systems like waste bank and so on. Because I've seen a lot of factories in our country, it's already been doing a lot of good production of products based products of recycling materials. So I think this is what happened. I mean, the recycling business, the industry is there, but it's a matter of how to make it grow. Yes, it's really, really challenging in Indonesia.
Thank you so much for your inputs on that. I think it's not just Indonesia; it's around the world, for sure. I would actually move on to Dr. Chaturvedi, because very similar things are happening here in India as well. And we had like a single-use plastics ban here, but we're almost seeing a reverse in this trend. And so I'd like to ask Dr. Chaturvedi, is the sector equipped or not equipped to deal with the rise in volumes? And since we're seeing almost a reversal of the ban, what do you think is going to happen again in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Aditi. And I'm not sure if I would say there's a reversal. Of course, there is a certain slowdown. And of course, there are certain challenges. Of course, the pandemic is one challenge. It's not the only challenge towards single-use plastic. So the move towards single-use plastics. But I think we have examples. Now, for instance, we work very closely with the Goa sort of government. So Goa is a very big tourist hub. And we work in the capital city of the Goa state, Panaji. And there they've already moved quite aggressively. Well, I think, can you hear me still?
We can hear you.
All right. No, because it showed on my screen that my connection was lost.
No, you're
okay. So yeah, well, I think in Goa, for instance, they've already completely gotten rid of plastic straws very aggressively. And so even the street side hawkers are actually not using plastic straws at all. There are, of course, sort of some movements. For instance, one of the largest e-commerce companies announced that they will go only for non-plastic based packaging material. Of course,
that's what they said, but I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So at least they've announced their intent, and it's a public announcement. So of course, they can be called out for not following up on it. And of course, there is, even with the personal protective equipment, if you look at the masks, there is such a vibrant mood to go for cloth-based masks, all kind of cloth-based masks, which can be reused and sort of repurposed. So I think at least the intent is there, of course, and then certain states have also announced the bans as well as the
Ashish, we lost you this time. So while we wait for him to come back, I have one last question for Ms. Tan, and then we will move on to the question and answers from the audience. So this is for all the speakers. It's basically a sort of concluding this panel discussion session. I want to ask you, what kind of potential for regional cooperation to deal with plastic waste do you see? How can we all 4 different countries here on the panel, and then Asia is even bigger, and the globe. What do you think we can do together regionally?
Actually, I was looking forward for you to ask me this question. So to me, I think for our regional friends here, actually our environment minister made an announcement a couple of days ago, stating that Singapore is not in a hurry to ban plastic bags. We are exploring ways to recycle plastics in Singapore. So the solution to this is really technologies, and what kind of technologies that we can adopt in Singapore, as well as regional partnerships or regional cooperation. The post-effect of the China ban and the bill that has already been passed with the global impact to restrict the export of plastics that is contaminated, right? And to fulfill its international obligations as a party of the Basel Convention, as well as, you know, the control of the trans-boundary movements of hazardous waste. It actually created more awareness to all these small, medium companies where they need to rely on technologies to get their processes, right, to really get a much cleaner plastics and less recyclables to be sent to the incineration plant that our local NEs manage, or you know, the recyclables to be sent to landfill, such as like in Malaysia or India or even in Indonesia. So this is something that we could really look at, but I'm very sure there is definitely a potential for the regional cooperation. Other than just trading of recyclables, we could really explore technologies, right? Technologies and solutions, such as like, could we do a cooperation between mechanical recycling? Could we do cooperations between chemical recycling, or even service expertise, consultancies, and such activities that we could really look at? Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's a very positive message, actually. So we had organized a webinar recently on the fourth industrial revolution and how that's affecting waste management. So technologies is, of course, the future. It's not just about trading recyclables, but going into how, you know, exchanging service expertise and so on, and technologies and so on. So we're almost done with this. I just want to come back to Dr. Chaturvedi. He got cut off halfway. He was, at the moment that he got cut off, he was talking about good initiatives that are taking place. It's not a reversal in ban, at least not officially. It's just the trend that has been seen because of the pandemic. But many e-commerce websites and other organizations are saying that they're going to be removing plastic packaging and so on. So sorry, you got cut off. You can pick up from there.
Yeah, well, sort of, I think, yeah, what I wanted to say was that there are positive moves, of course, but the challenge still remains. And I think, I think the government also realizes those challenges. There have been significant sort of initiatives at convening the private sector as well as sort of regulators to think about sort of defining and then dealing with single-use plastic. So I think that sort of activity is happening in the background. And we need to support this. And I think the pandemic, we can't put too many hopes into the pandemic as well. There are, of course, limits to what we can hope to achieve during the pandemic. But I think there are sort of significant possibilities. For instance, this entire idea of kind of being able to set up systems without sort of significant support of the informal sector. Is it possible? Is it possible? What does it mean in practice? Is it sort of, how can we imagine that reality that the informal sector, if it doesn't exist in large cities, what kind of service provision would happen? And if that sort of reality is confronted by large sort of city managers, then I think we'll be in a much better position to think about, okay, what do you do when the informal sector is not there? And what do you do? How do you incorporate the informal sector in formal systems? And I think this is a very nice natural experiment, which we have been forced into sort of confronting. And I think some cities have actually realized this, and the sort of the commissioners and the heads of the cities, the mayors, have said, okay, no, we need to integrate the informality much more, rather than kind of alienating it, and kind of bring these people together much closer into our formal systems of working as well. And of course, the numbers that Dini was presenting, just imagine 2 million sort of people in the informal sector, and as compared to 160,000 in the formal sector. We have comparable numbers in India. Maybe the magnitude is much larger, many times over. So how do you actually sort of give credence to the fact that these are people who are already on the streets, who are already providing these services without getting any acknowledgement for implementation sort of those activities on the ground? So even if we don't kind of formally engage them in the private kind of companies' operations, can we let them operate and rely on them and not get sort of completely worried about their existence and deny them sort of opportunities to access waste also? Absolutely. So I think these are things that we are sort of, the natural experiment has allowed us to kind of confront, and hopefully good sense will prevail.
Yeah, hopefully. And I like what you said, is that let's not put all our hopes on the pandemic. I think that's the only that's the only time anyone would say that, like, we're pinning our hopes on the pandemic. But absolutely, you've you've put it in the right perspective. Thank you very much, and sorry that you got cut off in the middle. Now I'm just going to quickly move on very, very quickly to our question and answers from the audience members. They've been typing furiously, and I have some for you to answer. Maybe you can just fight it out. I don't know who the questions will go directly to, but I'm just going to read them out in order, if that's okay. Right? So the first question is from Louis Lee, and he says, there's no doubt mankind needs to use technology to resolve the plastic waste problem. Dear panelists, in your country, what is the latest technology you believe can change the way we manage plastic waste effectively in a circular economy footprint? So going once, going twice, who wants to go with this? Who finds it interesting? Who wants to? Ms. Tan? Can't hear you.
Can you repeat your question again, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'll read it out again. So Louis Lee says, there's no doubt mankind needs to use technology to resolve plastic waste problem. Dear panelists, in your country, what is the latest technology you believe can change the way we manage plastic waste effectively in a circular economy footprint, or looking at it from a circular economy perspective? Just paraphrasing that one.
Okay, so basically, I mean, for circular economy, right, it's somebody, you know, the generator, right, will generate the plastics, consumer will use it, and then for us as a waste collector or a recycling company, how do we make good use that we can actually recycle it, reproduce a byproduct of the recyclables, and then we can then sell it out again as a recycled or completed recycled products. For the question, right, I think the Singapore companies, the waste and recycling companies, and together with our government, we are actually exploring the various alternatives to look at closing the loop. So that is why in the very, I think 1 or 2, probably about last week, there's also actually an announcement that, you know, the German association is also coming in to really explore the plastics recycling. So so basically, for example, right, it could be just like a bottle to bottle recycling, but it's a food grade recycling. So this is something like, you know, one alternative that our Singapore companies are looking at, based on, you know, a mechanical recycling on the bottle to bottles. In terms of the chemical recycling, then we are really looking at taking in a bit of a contaminated plastics, where they could then be churned into, you know, chemicals where they can actually, I would say, chemicals or some sort of petrochemical properties, where it can then be fed into our crackles, crackles in the petrochemical companies in Singapore. So these are various, you know, these are the 2 options that we are really looking at. But I think one thing that I also would like to also stress is that the nationwide sourcing, you know, plastic source of recycling or separation is also very important, because if all kind of plastics are being commingled together, it actually makes our life as a collector or recycler very, very difficult, because the clean plastics are being contaminated with, you know, the dirty plastics. So I think, to me, I look at closing the loop. Public education is really important, because that is the first step, right? Teaching the people how to recycle right? What is to be thrown into our blue bins. In the municipal collection, we actually have the big blue bins where they can dispose it in a correct manner, and collector would then pick it up, separate it, sort it, and then we can then either do a mechanical recycling or a chemical recycling, and then turn out to be a recycled product. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was very comprehensive. I have a question for Mr. Ho. Weber Vrati is asking, is there any discussion in Malaysia on reducing the reliance on imports of virgin plastics and increasing circularity of plastics generated in the country? Is it seen as a viable business case at the national level? So he asked for 2 countries, Malaysia and Philippines, but coming to Malaysia?
We have quite a huge demand for virgin plastics in Malaysia. The plastic manufacturing industry in Malaysia is very well developed, and they're also manufacturing all kinds of products and exporting them. At the same time, the locally generated plastics are probably not sufficient to feed the industry, or the quality doesn't match the requirements of these industries. To give a good example of how we can actually contain or rather promote the recovery of these plastics, I would say the paper industry that we started some 20 years ago, where Malaysia actually planned to ban the import of paper, and we recycled 90% of all our newsprint. So there was a concerted effort. You cannot export the old used papers, and you have to collect it and send it to a paper mill here. So that helped, and I think the same approach can be done for plastic. It requires some regulation enforcement to make it work, and some incentives as well. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask one last questions each to Dr. Chaturvedi and Ms. Trisyanti. Starting with Ms. Trisyanti, it says, from Dhruv Trehan asked this, could you please shed more light on the take-back mechanisms for plastic packaging in Indonesia? How can e-commerce companies, especially those that depend on individual producers, ensure this, especially as sorting and collection systems is a big problem?
Yeah. Well, in Indonesia, since we don't have a well implemented waste segregation at source, so a lot of the waste facilities, they sort the materials, and it's like a centralized facility, something like that, and some of them use manual mechanisms, like people picking up the plastics and papers and so on. But the other ones, they have like mechanical conveyors and so on to help speeding up the process of segregation. So I think we have a couple of schemes for take back. There was some of them. Another one is the source segregation system from Waste Bank. This is also one of the take back scheme that is going to be more accelerated for EPR scheme also. And I also seen some development on the apps applications, like from your mobile phone and so on, to pick up your waste. Like a couple of applications already in Indonesia. But still, what I see is this ecosystem needs to be more, a fundamental part of it is really to have it more spreaded instead of just concentrated in Java Island at the moment. So it's a very challenge of logistic matters, I think, because, for example, the apps for picking up waste in Sulawesi cannot really be used by Jakarta, for example. So I think the initiatives of using online segregation or taking back system is there, and offline system with the waste bank and TPS 3R small facilities also there. But I think the core of the problem, as I mentioned, is like the systematic waste management in the cities, in the municipal level. That needs to be really improved. And then if we have a very good backbone of the service delivery system in the cities, I believe we can develop other take-back system easily, instead of having it scattered. But then the core of the problem, which is the main collection systems, is not really addressed. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dini, for a comprehensive answer. Now I'm going for the last question for Dr. Chaturvedi, and there were so many interesting ones to pick out from. I don't know which one to give you, but there's another one, because since you already mentioned EPR systems, maybe just give a minute more. on what are the issues that are emerging in working together with EPR regulations and municipal solid waste management. You did refer to it a little bit in your previous answer, but if you can just within a minute like summarize.
No, I think the one sort of critical challenge is, can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, so the critical challenge that we are facing is sort of about this. Well, sort of, for instance, in a city, you have a certain kind of infrastructure which is put by the municipal services, right? So municipality has financial resources to set up certain kind of infrastructure, be it material recovery facilities, be it sort of a compost plant, be it sort of a recycling plant or even a waste to energy plant, right? Now with EPR, there are possibilities of setting up similar kinds of infrastructure, which doesn't necessarily need to be kind of financed through municipal budget, right? So a brand can decide to set up a take back system and set up a material recovery facility for its brand because they are mandated to reach targets which have been identified by the waste management rules. Now, of course, if the municipality has an overarching sort of design, then the individual companies can actually pitch into the overarching design by saying, okay, we need to set up 25 material recovery facilities across the city. Some of these will be financed by the municipal budget. Some of these will be financed by the extended producer responsibility contributions by the brands. Now, that I think that overarching picture, that overarching sort of system is not available right now for all the cities. That overall visioning document, and this is something that we've tried to kind of discuss with some of the cities with whom we've worked together very closely, that why don't you prepare something like a vision document of what you want the waste management system to look like for the next 5 and 10 years, and what kind of infrastructure is required. So I think that is one key requirement, that how do you actually have an overarching vision and where do different people come and fit in together. The other is, of course, contractual sort of relationships between the EPR sort of systems as well as the municipal service systems. Where do they interact with each other? Are there similar actors? For instance, the recyclers, are they partners of both the municipal system as well as the EPR system? Do they have similar framework conditions under which they operate, or are they conflicting conditions? Because in some set of cases, for instance, the same recycler might have a contract with extended producer responsibility with some brands, and the same recycler will have a contract with the municipal service provider. And if the contractual conditions are different, then there are arbitrage possibilities, right, across these two systems. And this might actually create some possibilities of rent seeking and some possibilities of kind of miscommunication across these two systems as well. And I think this is precisely where these two systems need to come together as well. So, of course, these are just 2 points that I wanted to raise: an overarching vision where different systems can plug in, but also the contractual system conditions, so that there's a level playing field and kind of transparency for the different players in the system as well.
Yeah, good. Two contact points, and I like this overall vision. When we do mission statements for companies, we can definitely do this kind of thing as well. This is necessary. Thank you very much, Dr. Chaturvedi and rest of the panelists. Now we're coming into the concluding phase of our webinar, and I would like to give each speaker just exactly 30 seconds to 45 seconds to summarize, have a concluding statement about, in 45 seconds, what is the greatest challenge for the waste management sector as you see it now? And what are the take-home messages, like a positive message that the participants can leave with, about how our behavior can be like a positive force for change right now. So I would start with Mr. Ho. Your time starts now.
Okay, Aditi. I'll just make an observation. Malaysia and the ASEAN region, basically, we need a bold policy that's similar to the EU directive. As far as waste management is concerned, by setting a landfill diversion target with incentives and penalties. I've seen this work in Europe, and maybe the differences between the European countries are not that similar, but you have seen how it benefited the Eastern European countries with the EU directive. And similarly, we have, the richer Singapore and the other less richer economies in the ASEAN. But waste is something that will, doesn't go away, and if it contributes to the global warming and carbon footprint, if we don't do anything about it in our own backyard.
Yeah.
Now, the tipping fees in Malaysia is extremely low, which I believe is similar to other countries as well, except for Singapore. You're talking about $3 to $10 per ton for landfill tipping fees. And even the waste to energy proposals that we are talking about are receiving offers of under $10 per ton, and
Wow.
we don't. You'll be surprised, but there are companies that offer that. Whether it actually works or is sustainable, it's a different story. We do have feed-in tariffs of about 10 cents per kilowatt hour, but but during the previous government, they dropped another 3 cents of it. So that's just makes it worse, because you need the tipping fee to offset that. So these are some of the issues that need to be overcome. More than 50% of our landfills are dump sites in Malaysia, and they are all overfilled and creating an environmental issue such as landfill fires, groundwater contamination. So basically, the cost of inaction will ultimately result in higher costs to the government because of sickness, because of diseases arising from poor sanitation, loss of tourism income. So we've been telling them that waste management doesn't come cheap. Unless people stop producing waste, you have to manage it. It doesn't end with the guy taking waste out from your bin. It has to end up somewhere, and they're really filling up so fast. And the COVID-19 pandemic, I think, is a very bitter and painful lesson, with lives being lost and businesses shutting down. I really hope that the leaders and the public sectors will rethink their priorities and allocate more budget to waste management to establish a more sustainable and a safer future for everyone.
Absolutely. Power to you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Moving on to Ms. Tan. I have the same question for you. A minute, your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you. I think the greatest challenge for Singapore at the moment is manpower. We will definitely be, facing a lot of a manpower crunch to really carry out the waste collection as well as the sorting activities, right? With this current pandemic, it actually causes a reduction in our drivers, in our workers. Because I think in waste management and recycling concept, right? I mean, the mindset, we are not so sexy, even though we are always a sunshine business, right? But I think the Singaporeans are still, taking it, not taking it so well, and they are not forthcoming in taking on to such a job in a waste management sector. So for WMRAS, we are actually working very closely with our companies to actively source for alternative solutions, as well as to really encourage them to really look at their work processes that they have to really remodel it. That means we can no longer live or work the same as before. We need to adapt and adopt the new normal waste management collection, as well as recycling services. And the way I look at, my message to our participants today, is really look at the bright side. We are, in a sunshine business. So we just need to really think out of the box where, how can we do our business, right? Our businesses in a much better and a much effective way. It's a new way. So it's something that none of us will really know what to do, because even like Singapore companies, we were also slow. We are also, technology, you can wait. But with the pandemic, things are different. We look at it very differently. We are aggressively trying to expedite in looking at various alternatives to really speed up the work processes. So I think it's important. So we have to have a like-minded, really positive mindset. But most importantly, we are sunshine business.
Nice. I love that.
Thank you.
We're a sunshine business, guys. Thank you so much, Ms. Tan. A very positive message. Moving on to Dr. Chaturvedi, please take a moment to give us your thoughts, some take-home messages, some positivity.
Yeah, I think a critical sort of point right now is that short-term considerations because of the pandemic should not put long-term agendas which have been sort of, which we've all been kind of championing and fighting for and getting success. And plastic, sort of the reversal against plastics was one such sort of movement. So I think the short-term concerns due to the pandemic should not kind of move us away from this path. I think we should definitely continue to push this agenda forward. It has nothing to do with the fact that plastic's not a sort of a good material, but I think it's just the realization that there are limits to sort of the benefits of a certain material, and I think we should really acknowledge the limits of those benefits and continue our sort of priorities for the long term, which have been identified nationally as well as internationally. So I think that's really important, and I think that's why this webinar is very timely, that we really need to kind of bring all the key actors in the region together to start thinking systematically about our long-term priorities are to find, sort of limit the use of single-use plastics, and also to find alternatives and to set up good recycling systems in our economies. So I think these are things which are really important. I think as individuals, people who are sitting in their rooms right now, sort of frustrated about being the fact that they can't go out anywhere, well, the least you can do is deal with your plastics better, deal with your waste better. You have a sort of you are at home, you have a lot of time on your hands on occasions. You are actually sort of, please look inside your bins and see what you find. And you might actually find a lot of treasures that you would like to sort of, you would like to sort of kind of preserve them. You might want to deal with them nicely. You might actually be gentle with them. And I'm actually trying to do that with my two boys who are at home with me, sort of trying to kind of make them relate to the waste that is in our bins a lot better. And I think all of us can do that. And that would be a start as well. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I think for Indonesia, we still have the biggest challenge in the economic situations that happens maybe not only in Indonesia, but globally. Yeah? So for certainty and availability of funding support for us is becoming very, very challenging now. Even before pandemic, we faced big gaps to overcome a better waste management, including plastic waste. So I think it's understandable that a lot of priorities of the government are now given to COVID relief measures and economic recovery and so on. So in waste management sector, in my opinion, it's more realistic to look at a rather medium scale investment on waste management and recycling, focusing on waste processing and sorting facilities that is maybe closer to the city settlement. But for this to happen, the critical point is to have a business model that could work both ways and sustainably ways, as a public service in one way and also industrial feedstock as the other way. So this is some kind of circular economy. And in Indonesia, we really envy Singapore and Malaysia that already implement a privatization of waste sector, but we are still struggling for that in our country. So I think especially the financial aspect, we need more assistance to local governments to help them with guidelines, technical assistance, collaboration measures, the contracting documents, so on. It's very complicated for them. So I would hope that in the coming years, this can happen. And for putting on hope for the situation, I think also that waste management that is closely engaging circular economy, I think would be the bridging solution to this difficult situation, because I think involving more industries to offtake our waste is one of the way to overcome our burden in landfills. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're the sunshine business. Don't forget.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your positivity, amazing insights. I think it's been a fabulous webinar, if I may say so myself. The recording of this webinar, so thank you participants for staying so long. And if you missed any bits, you can go back. The recording of this webinar is going to be available on the ISWA's YouTube channel, and you can access them there along with all the others we've done so far. Thank you so much, speakers, for joining us today. You've done a really, really nice job of putting it all together in the right context. We have several more webinars coming up, so join us next time. Goodbye, see you next time, and thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you all.
Stay safe. Bye.